Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson, thank you so much.
Of course.
Lots to talk about today. First, wanted to start with crime. Unfortunately, we, over the weekend, had made national headlines with multiple people shot. One person was killed. And this comes, we had this several weeks ago, last month as well. And while the city made a lot of progress last year, we still have some challenges as it relates to homicides, shootings, et cetera. What can you tell me about that?
Well, look, I'll tell you this. It's a horrible situation. There's no way around that. It's something that's very upsetting to me personally. I grew up in Dallas. I'm a son of this city, and I grew up in some neighborhoods that were not always the safest. And so you've never had a person in this position who cares more about this issue than I do personally. And so situations like this past weekend are deeply upsetting to me. And I can tell you that I've talked to Chief Garcia, and he understands how important it is that we bring this person to justice as quickly as possible. So I'm confident that's going to happen. But I also conveyed to the chief how important it is that we look at this situation from all angles and see if there's anything that we can do as a city to make it less likely that something like this happens again. And he assured me that he's going to talk to the city attorney, he's going to talk to the city manager about what changes we can make to the law to make these large, non-permitted events where you've got ATVs and horses and a concert all happening at the same time, and you've got off-duty police officers who were there but then left. All those things are being looked at. He's already made a very, I think, smart policy change to not allow officers to work non-permitted events. But we're going to look at whether or not we need to create new types of permits and whether or not this situation could have been avoided in any way from the city standpoint. And we're going to make those changes quickly, and hopefully nothing like this ever happens again.
I was going to ask you about the chief's new policy, effective immediately, which started yesterday, about officers who work off-duty can't if they're not permitted. But doesn't that also raise the question of saying, hey, if the officers are contacted, if they're hired, say, you need to get a permit for this? I mean, is that part of what's being looked at as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Public Safety Committee exists for this very purpose, to think about our policies as they relate to public safety and keeping our city safe. So I think they're going to have to look at this incident and figure out, first and foremost, was this an event that needed to be permitted and somehow didn't get one? Is it a situation where for some weird loophole, it didn't actually require a permit? And if so, we need to close that loophole. But we're going to break down. I'm going to encourage the city manager and the city attorney to work with the chief very meticulously to come up with responses, legal responses, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But at this point, we're still exploring and figuring out exactly how it came about. But again, I can assure you, there's no higher priority of mine or of the city than keeping everyone safe. Public safety is the top priority in the city of Dallas.
I wanted to ask you something that you just said, just to follow up on. You mentioned the ATVs and the horses. What did you have in mind when you said that, as far as the city looking at? I mean, is that something that's in code that's not allowed to happen, that needs to, or is there a loophole, et cetera? It's
a question that I have myself. I mean, when I was informed by the police chief, when we sat down yesterday for a long time, and he told me what he knew about the situation. There's a lot he still doesn't know about the situation. They're investigating, looking into it. But my understanding is that, this started off as a trail ride with people on horses that somehow morphed into several ATVs rolling around, which then turned into a concert that was featuring an artist who had been involved in a situation in another city where someone had been shot, and then the artist didn't show up somehow, and that contributed, I think, to some of the unrest, is what we're thinking. So there's a lot to unpack here. Again, a horrible situation. You absolutely have to hold responsible the people who pulled the trigger. The person who did this, we are going to find that person, bring them to justice. And that is the first and foremost thing you have to do in a situation like this. But the other thing we have to do is be honest and look at what we could do better, if anything, and we're going to do that. We're going to take an honest look at that situation and try to get better.
I wanted to ask you also, I was just taking a look at the latest crime stats, and I know violent crime is down year to date compared to last year, 9.3%. But when you look at homicides, shootings, they're still up. for year to date. I think it was about 6%. So what's your thought about that and where we are right now?
I think you got to break the violent crime overall statistic down a little bit to get the full picture. So overall, violent crime is down. I think your 9% figures, it sounds about right. But within violent crime, we have homicides, aggravated assaults, robberies, and I know that every category of violent crime that I just named is down year to date right now from last year, which was a lower year than the previous years, and put us in a situation where we end up having overall less violent crime than most of the major cities in America, and certainly every top 10 city in America. But just the homicide number alone being up slightly is of course of concern. The chief and I talked about that, and we said, we have to take a longer view of this to see kind of where things go, but the overall trajectory of all of our violent crime is down. I think aggravated assaults are down about 7%, robberies are down about 15%, overall violent crimes down 9%, but the homicides are up just slightly from where they were this time last year. We're keeping our eye on that. But the overall trend of violent crime is down, clearly, and down from a year where it was down from the previous year. So the trajectory is exactly what you want to see.
And my last question on this topic is, obviously Chief Garcia is working on it, the department is working on it. You had your commission on crime to lower the rate. Those efforts are still ongoing. What message do you have for residents just about crime and where we are as a city right now?
The residents of Dallas need to understand, again, you've never, ever had a mayor who's cared more about this issue, because I lived it. I've grown up in this city. I grew up in a time in our city that was particularly dangerous in the United States, and I grew up in some neighborhoods that, if we're just being honest, were not the safest. And so this is a personal issue for me. I've taken it personally. We've hired a police chief who takes it personally. And we've committed to each other and to the city that we are going to work around the clock to continue to make Dallas as safe as it possibly can be. And we're doing that, and we're getting the results. Overall, violent crime is down, despite an event like this past weekend, which gets a lot of attention because it's pretty high profile and multiple people in one incident got shot. And so that is going to get attention. But people need to understand it's not really reflective of the overall trend in violent crime in the city, which is down and down considerably. So just know that we are on it, that we are going to find this person, bring him to justice, and that we are not going to let up when it comes to reducing violent crime in this city, period.
Let's talk about your trip to Mexico last week. Why was this so important for you as the mayor and for the city?
We needed to send the message to the world that Dallas is back open for business. I think we're starting to see reports about Dallas's economy, how much it's bounced back and how much our jobs have come back. But I think we have not yet seen people reporting on and talking about how we are now ready to re-engage with the rest of the world. And so I wanted to send the message that we are open for business, that we are ready to engage with our partners around the world, and that Mexico was the place to start. Mexico is a country where we do about $1.5 billion worth of trade with them in this region. So the North Texas region and Mexico are incredible trading partners, and it's a very balanced trade relationship. It's roughly half and half, $700-ish million annually of export and import for the two countries. So a very strong and balanced trade relationship like that, you don't want to take it for granted. So I wanted to go to Mexico first and let them know we are as committed to this relationship as we've ever been, and we want to see if we can grow it even more. And the response was excellent.
So what are the concrete takeaways for residents and businesses here in the city of Dallas as far as when you talk about trade? Are we talking about tourism? Are we talking about perhaps some economic development, more flights, between our airports? I mean, what specifically can people expect to come from this?
You're pretty good. You actually hit on some of the ones that come to mind right away that we talked about. So my first stop was in Mexico City. And in Mexico City, the seat of the federal government there, the conversation was really focused on the country overall of Mexico and the Dallas area and what we can do to enhance the economic ties. And so we had conversations with the leading the leading airlines in Mexico, and talked about enhancing and increasing the air travel between Mexico and Dallas and into DFW in particular. We talked about the cultural ties between Mexico and Dallas and how a third of our residents here in Dallas are of Mexican descent. And we had a successful partnership with the Mexican government in terms of lending collections to our museum here and other things like that. And we want to do more of that sort of thing to help create that cultural connection and deepen it. Then the trip shifted after 2 days in Mexico City to Monterrey, which is our sister city, and it's a very similar city to Dallas in terms of size and it being the most pro-business city in the entire country of Mexico. So a lot of similarities to Dallas, and we talked about how we can increase tourism between the two cities. I think folks in Dallas would enjoy visiting Monterrey, and I think folks in Monterrey would enjoy visiting Dallas, and we want to enhance that, and we also want to deepen our sister city relationship. So we talked about having them, the mayor of Monterrey and a delegation of folks from their city and also from the state of Nuevo León, come to Dallas to re-enter and to re-sign a new sister city agreement this year, which would be the 30th anniversary of our original signing of that agreement. So that's very exciting.
Does all this lead to jobs in the city?
It does. I mean, believe it or not, there is a correlation between the ability to provide, say, direct flights between two locations and the willingness of companies to locate headquarters here, which then create jobs. So this is an astonishing fact to me, but of all of the Mexican investment in the entire United States in terms of foreign direct investment, 35% of it is anchored and headquartered or has the principal office in North Texas. So that's real jobs for real North Texans and Dallasites by having that connectivity. And when people are choosing where to put that Mexican company's American headquarters, they're certainly looking at places where they can get in and out very easily, and there's several flights a day on multiple airlines, and so that's why the air routes are important. And then the tourism, of course, that drives our economy as well. That creates jobs in and of itself. So there are lots of economic benefits for Dallasites to this relationship, and it's just, we have such a deep cultural connection to Mexico that we want to encourage that as well, because it's good for our children, it's good for educational reasons, and so it was a great visit, and they are as excited about deepening the relationship as we are.
Last question on this topic I wanted to ask you about, as you mentioned before, and you've said it frequently in a lot of different events that you've been at, that Dallas is an international city. And so when you compare it to the other large cities that we have in Texas, Houston and Austin in particular, they've seen a lot of growth lately, they've gotten a lot of buzz. So how important is it that Dallas be on the world stage to compete?
It's critical because we are in a competition. It's a friendly competition, and we love to see conversations about the Texas miracle and about the southwestern United States and how it's growing. But the city of Dallas needs to be able to hold its own. So we have to be honest about where we have a competitive advantage over those other cities. And one of those areas that we have identified that we believe presents a unique opportunity for Dallas is in growing this international piece. So, Austin is known for its tech, not so much for its airport, not so much for getting in and out of and getting to other places and conducting business. Houston's known for petrochemicals. I would argue that we have the most dynamic economic situation here in North Texas between our incredible financial services industry, healthcare, technology, plus the transportation hub that we are between the airports and the inland port and things like that. So that, I think, is where we can actually grow faster than some of our competitors, is by focusing on these international relationships, particularly with Mexico.
It's been a minute since you and I have had a formal interview, and so one of the things that has happened since the last time we spoke is the City Council approving a new convention center, basically starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Why did you supported that? Why do you think that is necessary to start over?
I I'm always honest, so I'm going to say, to be honest, to imply that I'm not. But we just got to be honest about the convention center. It's not befitting the city of Dallas. It's just not up to par. It's not the dynamic, game-changing driver of either economic activity in the central business district that it could be, nor is it particularly the draw that it should be for purely the purposes of a convention center. So it's dilapidated, the layout is not ideal, and frankly, we need a do-over on this because we could have a convention center that competes better for conventions, which is the purpose of the building itself, but it also could be more of a driver of economic development in this area. This portion of downtown could be transformed and would be transformed if we actually develop the convention center the right way. And that means mixed use and lots of development around it that cater to the needs of the people who live here, not merely look at it as a place to host an event or a convention center. So that is why I think we have to seize this opportunity, particularly since it will be paid for not by local property taxes, but by hotel occupancy taxes and rental car revenues. So that is an ideal situation, I think, to be able to create economic development that we benefit from, but that we don't directly pay for.
Is there another convention center in another city that comes to mind when you talk about this and what your vision may be?
When we heard in the presentation about some of the convention centers, I don't want to give them free PR, but we heard about some of the convention centers that have done a better job of turning it into more of a venue and more of a space for performances and things like that. I will throw out one. I say maybe Nashville comes to mind in a lot of people's minds as a good example of how to approach it. But the bottom line is we are leaving a lot on the table in terms of opportunity with the current configuration. And when we're talking about being able to do something like this with revenue that can only be used for this purpose, again, this is not revenue that A, we pay out of our local property taxes, but B, it's also revenue that can't just be used for street repairs. It can't be used for any other purpose other than something like this. This is just one of those opportunities. It's just smart. We have to seize this opportunity, and I think we're going to.
So who is going to make sure that this project is on time and on budget? Because it's still tax dollars, regardless of whether it comes out of local property taxes or hotel taxes, et cetera.
You are speaking my language when you talk about accountability, because that's been the mantra of my administration. I don't think that our job is to just approve things and then move on to the next thing and never look back. I think we have to actually be the primary driver of oversight and accountability anywhere in the city limits where any revenues are being expended that we actually approved. So my answer to that would be myself and the Dallas City Council needs to be the primary driver of accountability and make sure that our city staff understands that we have high expectations for this project and we want it to serve the needs of Dallas residents, not just the visitors themselves, and that those two goals are not at cross purposes at all.
When you see the different projects, different from the convention center, but new projects coming into downtown Dallas, uptown, fairly on a regular basis now. What's going on? I mean, are people rediscovering Dallas beyond the old TV show?
It's a great story. I mean, I think the story of Dallas is a great one. Because really, and I talk to my counterparts around the country, other mayors. I lived some other places before. I was born and raised in Dallas, went away for school. I've made a lot of friends around the country. I think people are really impressed with the quality of life that you can have here relative to the cost, particularly as it relates to the coast and as it compares to the coast. So Dallas is not a place that forces you to really make hard choices between whether or not you're going to have things to do for your family and can afford a place to live, have a good job, have a good life. And so I think this is just a part of the country that you're going to see continue to grow. And all the projections suggest that we're in the middle of this. We're not even close to being at the end of our sort of amazing run of prosperity. So, I mean, I think we have a good story to tell, and I think you're seeing more and more companies want to move their headquarters here. I think you're going to see more jobs continue to come here, and I think you're going to see more investment in Dallas. So it's a great city to be mayor of because it's an easy story to sell other places because it's a great town, and people are what make it so great.
Any new specifics you'd like to share?
No, just really, things are moving in the right direction in our city. I couldn't be happier with how the council's working together and our priorities are in the right order at this point. I mean, we're really focused on public safety. We've done ethics reform now, and I'm very confident now that we've hired an inspector general that we're going to see things really run differently around here. And I just think the vibe and the mood, not just in this building, but in the city, is 100% positive, and it's just a great place to be right now. I'm so happy. I'm very proud.
Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.